Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would please have a roll call, Myra?
Commissioner Source,
Present.
Commissioner Oliveros,
Present.
Commissioner Jay,
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Great.
Sorry about that. We're double live stream. Okay, Commissioner Carpenter is excused. And then Commissioner Cohen, here, Commissioner Froskovas,
Here, hold on. That's it. 9.
oh.
All right. Everybody have a chance to review the minutes from the January 9th, 2025 meeting? Any corrections need to be made? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The minutes are accepted. I guess we'll just move right on down to new business. 7.1, request to extend subdivision approval for Brandy Meadows. Staff report, please, Fred.
Yes, you bet. So you'll remember a couple of years ago, Brandy Meadows came through with a project application. That application was for a 98 lot subdivision that included 186 dwelling units. The applicant has requested that subdivision approval be extended for 1 additional year. They did submit it on December 23rd, 2024. Well in advance of their expiration date for the application. There are 4 general criteria that you're supposed to evaluate to see if that should be extended. Those criteria are that the extension was filed at least 45 days prior to its expiration. It definitely met that. That it's in substantial conformance with the originally approved plan, definitely meets that. They have not asked for any sort of changes to the plan. They are also, they also submitted details about why they're asking for the extension. Basically interest rates and SBC increases have slowed their progress. Based on that, they do meet that standard. And then the 4th criteria is that no changes to the code provisions have been made, and that is definitely true as well. So based on all of that stuff, I would recommend that you folks extend this approval for 1 additional year. Are there any questions of me?
Thanks, Fred. Is it unusual for the applicant not to be present at the meeting when they're asking for an extension?
You know, typically an applicant is here. I kind of expected Zach to be here tonight. Is he online by any chance?
No.
So yeah, I would say it is somewhat unexpected, but it doesn't change the criteria at all. There is no criteria that the applicant be present when asking for the change.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we do have a sample motion, potential motion. This will take staff.
I move to approve the extension of the house. Under, I move to approve the extension of the land use approval grant under SUP 2022-02 Brandy Meadows, phases 5 through 9, with the conditions and findings articulated within the notice of decision for the project.
I'll second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
All right, oh, sorry,
We'll move along to 7.2.
yeah, thank you. That's
Rezone along Gun Club Road.
That's perfect, thanks for me, I was jumping the gun.
We're very official here, Fred.
Yeah, that's right. So this, this request in this last legislative session, the city of Independence was awarded some money to assist with a development project along Gun Club Road with Polk County Community Development. Coalition, consortium, or corporation, Polk CDC. And Myra, could you go to page 15 of the packet? This would change, I'm asking you folks if you feel comfortable in considering a potential change to the zoning. Along Gun Club Road for the 4 acres associated with that, and I'm pointing to it on the board behind you. There's 4 acres right there that is owned right now by Partnership and Community Living. And they're working with Polk CDC on developing a project on that. They were moving forward with something that would be consistent with medium density residential zone, but what that limits them to is more duplex style houses, more townhouse style uses. And what I told them I would ask you folks is, wait a second, maybe it actually makes more sense to consider a rezone for the area, in part because the Legacy Oaks apartments are directly to the north of it. Legacy Oaks is 198, I think, apartments, 196 apartments, 3-story buildings, all that sort of stuff. It made sense to me that given that development to the north, potentially it made sense to allow a similar type of development to the south. This would essentially allow Polk CDC to leverage the investment that the state was making in the infrastructure just a little bit more to get more housing units on the land. Now I will say, and I should have asked Myra to pull up like the Google Maps or something, but next time you're out on Gun Club Road, one of the things about like even the Legacy Oak apartments, when you're east of the road, you've got sort of the development sort of higher, and the apartments are sort of lower. It's the topography is sort of like creates it in such a way where there's sort of a natural divide that makes higher intensity uses sort of make sense in the lower area. And so it seems like potentially it makes sense. But I wanted you folks to weigh in on it, to see what you think. We can discuss it a little bit. Myra, can you zoom in just a little bit, just on Gun Club Road right there next to the Legacy Oak apartments, and can you drop the little guy there, the little yellow guy? Yeah. Perfect. So, and then, yeah, sort of give a sense.
We've talked about this.
What we talked about was we realized there was a problem a while ago with the way our zoning was written. Where we have a whole number of high density uses and medium density or low density zones. And so what we did was we tweaked our non-conforming use standards as a quick fix, rather than trying to go through a rezone of each of the properties, which.
But because of this, sorry to interrupt you, but because it's a new property, we have to go through a rezone.
Oh, yeah, we couldn't just allow a high density use outright in a medium density residential zone. And so the difference is primarily things like density. Going from a medium density zone to a high density zone, it would go from 12 units per acre to approximately 20 units per acre. And it would also change the use types allowed, so from things like townhouses or duplexes to things more like standalone apartment buildings. Given the fact, again, that there's apartments right next door, it is part of the reason why it makes sense to me. Also, Myra, if you could sort of spin it a little to the left, you can't get a good sense of this here, but there is a branch of Ash Creek. Yeah, click one down. There is a branch of Ash Creek, which is directly, you can kind of see the when this tree line right here is part of a creek thing. So it is really sort of an isolated thing where, I mean, sure, there's neighbors to the south more, but but it is really sort of an isolated site where you could go in and you could say higher density housing, and it would have limited impact across the street, in part because of the grade, limited impact to the west because of the stream channel further to the west. So it is really kind of a unique site that we could go into and do something like that.
It's, the creek is more south than the west.
Yeah, there's a branch of, and you can see it probably in the zoning map.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you can't see it in the zoning map. Can you click back out of this, Myra? So, oh, no, keep on showing the Google map, but just get out of the street view.
Yes. Again.
Yeah, just hit that back arrow right there.
Or the X. And the X to the right side. Will be-
Yeah, try it.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
So you can see right here. This
Okay.
is sort of a creek channel that comes down something like this, and there is a floodplain associated with this, and so. That's why Legacy Oak Apartments got built like this. So we're talking about specifically this site right here. The creek channel, I don't know exactly where it comes down, but it's something like that perhaps,
sure, that's.
or like.
Is it the only encumbrance to this project there, a higher residential, like a higher density project there? So are there going to be any issues? Basically, what I'm asking is, are they gonna land at medium density use after they go through the process anyway, because of like traffic concerns or floodplain concerns or anything else? Like, I don't know what it looks like, but I mean.
Yeah,
You see
so
what I'm
it's a good question. So there is a floodplain through this area. It does take up a portion of the site, but they can design basically the site outside of the floodplain, so that shouldn't be an issue. I did do a rough sort of back of the napkin sort of analysis of what the increase would do to the transportation planning rule, and I don't think that it would. It wouldn't trigger anything like that. In our TSP, we do talk a fair amount about Hoffman and our transportation system plan, we do talk a fair amount about Hoffman and Gun Club, but
That just got approved too.
it just got approved, and it's actually improved beyond what was considered necessary in the transportation system.
I'm just making sure that we don't go through this process
Yeah,
just to end up in the same place.
yeah, and ultimately, if we did allow this, it would allow them to go through their approvals in a much simpler way. Otherwise, they're probably gonna have to go through a land division to create individual lots and all that sort of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, they could essentially create one apartment site and do an apartment style development. So, again, really the reason that we were just talking with them, we're sort of like, considering the project, all that sort of stuff. They were comfortable with the medium density residential zone, but you know, given the fact that the state is investing in the project, given the fact that both they, as the state and us would like housing, we thought, the potential to leverage that state investment to get more units out of it makes some good sense.
Sold.
And it has access to Gun Club in 16th without going through neighborhoods, which is really nice. You don't have to go through houses to get to Gun Club.
Would they be and have entry off the 16th?
They would,
Yeah.
They
I think it's
would.
just a flow.
Okay,
it would just be one way in and one way out.
Yeah,
okay,
that's what I was worried, like, that's what I'm asking about.
okay.
Yeah, it's true,
Well, or even, it's not even maybe the impact on Buffalo, but just how the close proximity for all this. Traffic.
exactly. That's one thing that we did point out to them is the proximity that this. Right here is challenging, but that's something that we'll definitely consider as part of site plan review.
Okay. Okay,
Any other question?
this makes a lot of sense.
Okay, with something like this, you folks would have to have a public hearing on it, so what I'll do is just run it through, our normal process and all that sort of stuff, and it will come to you for a public hearing at some point in the future.
All right, thank you, Fred. All right, we'll move on to 7.3, goals for revisions to standards for infill development.
Perfect, so. We are, so we are gonna start a project about infill development pretty soon, and. So what I've put in front of you is just a whole bunch of maps and materials to sort of get us thinking about infill development. I'll be honest with you, I don't know where we're going with this project exactly. I know some of the goals that we've talked about. At the outset, but I thought that this would be a good chance for us to sort of have a conversation about what we might desire from infill development. So let's just go through the maps one by one, and then we can have sort of a general conversation about this stuff. Now, I'll just sort of preface this conversation is with the idea that infill development is fundamentally different than its opposite, greenfield development, right? Greenfield development is out on a piece of land that hasn't been touched before. And so a lot of times you get a developer or whatever come in and they do a bigger sort of subdivision, they do a series of houses together. With infill development, it's just a fundamentally different animal. It's just, it's because a lot of times it's local folks. Or a homeowner saying, what can I do with my land? Right, I wanna put a house back here, or you got some local developer looking for some opportunities, and so they're going into a site where they think maybe I can get one more unit on it. And so a lot of times it's smaller folks, right, doing stuff, it's just a different animal altogether. And because of it, fundamentally, our code, which is primarily for greenfield development, it just doesn't work very well. And we as a city are always tying ourselves up in knots, trying to figure out how do we handle this project, you know? What sort of street improvements are required? What sort of utility improvements are necessary? Are we gonna make them pave an alley, you know? Stuff like that, is challenging. Also, there's all sorts of challenges associated with things like the scale of development. How big is the building? And I think that's what a lot of people have apart. And I think those are fundamentally challenges that we know we would like to address as part of this, but I think that there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can address those, and so that's what I'm really hoping to talk about tonight. And sort of get an understanding of your folks' goals, the goals of you folks. So what I did was I just literally tried to pull as much information, put it on different maps so we could take a look at it, start to understand and maybe see our city in a different way than we normally see it. And so the first map that I gave you is a map of lot sizes. And on this map, you can see it goes from a dark color of lots between 0 and 3,000 feet, which there are very few, some in the downtown area, some out in Brandy Meadows, the townhouse lots in Brandy Meadows, the southwest portion of town. But otherwise, not a whole lot of 3,000 square foot, 0 to 3,000 square foot lots, but then you can see it gets progressively lighter and lighter and lighter. Until we get to the over acre lots. What you'll note is, like those 3,000 to 6,000 square foot lots, those are in newer portions of the community, or basically newer portions of the community, which is an interesting thing to realize, it seems to me. A lot of times we have the thought that traditional development has the smaller lots, but in our community, that's just fundamentally not true. We have places like down 7th Street, where there's a whole bunch of 3,000 to 6,000 square foot lots, as well as out on Morning Glory, Marigold, and all those sorts of places, in the northwest part of town. So that's one thing that I'd like you to see there. And you can see generally, there's lighter stuff more in the central portions of the community, right? So if you see that, just generally bigger lots in more of the traditional areas, which is an interesting thing. Also, of course, the air park has very big lots. Going on to the next map, then, we have the alley lot map, and I just put this on there, of course, because alleys fundamentally add flexibility with what you can do with your property. And so I just went ahead and I noted all of the lots that have alley access. And so you can see again, a whole bunch of those in older portions of the town. Right? A lot of those alleys, of course, aren't improved or anything like that. But that's one thing. The next map I prepared for you is a map of corner lots. Again, corner lots is one of those things, if you have access to two sides of the lot, you fundamentally have more flexibility with how you can get people to different portions of the lot. So I went ahead and I marked those. One thing that's interesting about this map is, again, in the more traditional areas of the community, you can see there's a higher proportion of corner lots. Why is that? The blocks are smaller. One of the things about Portland that's unique is Portland has very small blocks. It's known in urbanism for having extremely small blocks. The reason for that is because everybody realized having a corner building was a better thing. And so they had very short blocks. Portland is very unique for that. You can see our blocks, I can't remember exactly how wide they are, 66 times 4 essentially, 284 feet. 284 feet long and like about 300 feet long, right? So that's very small blocks. When you look more in the southwest portion of the town, you can see the blocks get longer. And so there's less corner properties. Isn't that kind of interesting too? I feel like when you look at stuff like this, and I mean, one thing, me preparing these and thinking about this is, man, fundamentally, it'd be nice to have more new neighborhoods put in alleys. It would be nice to have new neighborhoods have shorter blocks because they're just fundamentally more flexible, right? Something to think about for the future with as greenfield developments happening. Then this next one, and I apologize for this map. I was trying to figure out how to show this in a good way, but I tried to combine those couple of features so we could really see alleys, lot sizes, all that sort of stuff. So big lots, alleys, corner lots, and try and use them to sort of get a sense of where is the most opportunity for infill development. And fundamentally, a lot of the green stuff that we see are a lot of the colors on the map are in more historic portions of the community. And just so I thought that was interesting. The next map is it's a map that I just tried to do to say walkable areas. So proximity to trolley stops, proximity to like a walkable center. Where does that sort of cover? It gives you a sense. You can see the parcels in yellow are what I consider walkable centers. You know, a place where you could go get something to eat or whatever it might be. So there is that. Now, this next map is getting more into the kind of planner nerd territory, and I apologize for that. I heard one guy say this, and I thought it was so interesting, he says there's two types of buildings in a city, just two. You got house scale buildings and you've got block scale buildings, right? And so. The block scale buildings are where you're attaching buildings next to each other and the individual buildings contribute to a larger block. The house scale buildings are more standalone, right? And so going through our zoning code and identifying where we anticipate things that are close together, more walkable, more block scale. I mark those in red, and then the house scale buildings are all the yellow, right? And then the orange is sort of a mix where it's either high density residential. Or mixed use transitional zone, all that sort of stuff. I think that that's kind of interesting because it's a different way to sort of think and conceptualize the city is. If we think about it, we're building a whole lot of house scale sort of buildings, but in some areas, we're trying to create sort of walkable centers, and that's what I was trying to show here. Next map is allowed height, and I mean, we don't do this often, but I mean. Allowed height for our various zones, high density residential is 45 feet. Public service is 60 feet, light industrial is 45 feet. Heavy industrial is 70 feet. Then all the residential is 35. I'll just say, and I will call out too, for downtown is 40. Our mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial over here out at central Talmadge area is 45 to 55 still. From similar to what the downtown used to be. I just show you this because you know, I know that we had the downtown conversation kind of recently. I think it's kind of interesting to frame the downtown conversation in light of larger citywide look. Our tallest zone is the heavy industrial zone. Which I suppose makes sense. The one thing that I'll just call out with this is 35 feet in a residential zone, especially given the fact that a lot of our residential zone, a lot of our house scale buildings are far less than 35 feet. 35 feet might be kind of tall. And so that's one thing that I would like to look at as we're considering our infill standards. The next page sort of shows you how the 35 feet works, right? So if you've got, this is sort of how our zoning code works. We define setbacks, front, side, rear. We define height, so essentially we're defining like a basic building envelope that somebody could put a building in. Right? When you compare it to a standard sort of single family house, I drew a 1,200 square foot house. About maybe 25 feet high, a 35 foot tall building. Is gonna be big compared to that, if you show, we also have a 40% lot coverage. What you'll see, can you scroll down just to here, Myra, what you'll see with relation to that is people can. We don't really define how people can meet the 45 or the 40% lot coverage. But essentially what happens is people could build any number of ways on their site. And it doesn't, we don't really do a good job of specifying how to meet. How these standards actually relate to neighboring development. And I think that that's something that we could do far better as part of the infill standards, right? We can define how this works a whole lot better.
I'm drawing here the sample home.
Yeah.
How tall is that?
I think I drew that about 25 feet. Right, it's a two-story building, each of the stories are 10 foot tall. And so, I think that that's sort of my point, we have a whole lot of neighborhoods that are more like single story. Neighborhoods and putting in something 35 foot tall, so I think that this this is sort of the consideration that we're gonna need to weigh. If we're talking about potentially putting in other housing, like even a duplex. The scale of that in relation to the neighboring houses or how it's placed on a lot will have a big impact on the perception of that house by neighboring residents, if that makes sense. Right, and so that's hopefully trying to get to a point where we can allow the infill while minimizing the impacts on neighbors is hopefully what we can get to with this project, right? And then I just getting back to the whole idea of this, you'll note that we've essentially progressed through FUG here, form, use, and geography, right, Jose? We've talked about the geography, we've talked about the form. Now we're going to the use specifically, as we're thinking of these various use types that are allowed. Currently, we allow things like duplexes and townhouses in our medium density zone. We allow things like multifamily, but there is a whole bunch of like literature out there that there's a whole lot of different range, but there's a whole lot of there's a spectrum to the potential types of housing that could fit within those types of zones. And so this is really to sort of help us think about all of these different types of housing that there are. And there's a whole bunch of literature out there about middle housing. Some folks talk about middle housing in terms of income. Others talk about it specifically in terms of the types of housing. And so you'll see here, side-by-side duplexes is the first one. With this, you have 2 units side by side. There's 2 iterations here. One is accessed by alley, one is accessed from the front. You'll see, you know, in a lot of ways, these type of homes look like a home, right? The older ones, you can't quite perceive that it's a duplex, but you can see like in this image, for instance, there's 2 doors there, right? In this image right here, even though it looks like one house, there's 2 doors right there. The next page shows things like stacked duplexes. I haven't seen honestly a whole lot of stacked duplexes in my career. I will say that there's one on C Street. I almost rented it when I moved here. But the stairs go up similar to this one right here to the unit on the 2nd floor. There's a door to the 1st floor. It's between 2nd and 3rd on the south side of the street. It kind of looks like a old big Victorian house or something like that.
So it's white.
It's white.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. It's 2 down from the post office. So that's a stacked duplex, right?
Yeah.
And so the amazing thing about these is these used to be integrated in cities, like everywhere. All of these middle housing types, they used to be integrated in the design of cities. And you know, you see something like this, you see that, you think, oh, that's a single family home. You see something like that, and you're like, that looks like a single family home, it's a duplex. So so this is stuff to consider as we're doing this. Now, the next one, if you'll scroll down, Myra, is a stacked triplex. And this is probably pretty big for what I would argue is in our neighborhoods. This is 3 stories tall. That just looks a little tall, but it might work in something like our mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial transitional zone or multifamily areas. The next one is just one of my absolute favorite housing types. I love these things. 4plexes, little 2-story things. Essentially, they're divided into 4s, so all of the units are similar size. You've got a stair up. Myra, could you zoom in on one of them just so we can take a look at the door? Yeah, just,
Sorry.
Plus sign.
Yeah, I see it.
so like with that one right there. I can't tell, scroll down to that one, so this one, you can see there's 4 doors right there. What probably happens is this door enters this unit, this goes to a stairway to this unit, this goes to a stairway to this unit, this is right there. And all of the units are basically the same, you know, just mirror images of each other. I really love that housing style, it's amazing in old like Sears Roebuck catalogs, you see these things getting sold. In old Sears Roebuck catalogs. The story that I have for that, I'm sure I've told you before, when I was in Olympia. I was going around and I was documenting these various housing styles, and I was trying to make the argument to their planning commission that their most prized neighborhood had these housing types in it that were no longer allowed within that neighborhood. Their zoning no longer allowed them, and I took a picture of one that is the closest residential building to the Olympia State Capitol, it's a 4-plex, right? Those things fit very well with the scale of existing single family homes, especially if we could figure out how to define that scale so they didn't get too big, right? This is something that we could potentially do as part of this project. Just going on further, medium multiplex, just some various things, again, in certain neighborhoods, that's pretty tall. In certain neighborhoods, that's pretty tall, but if you scroll down just a little bit, potentially a 2-story it makes sense, you know, so sort of defining some of those things. Next page is townhouses, I think we know a little about townhouses. Again, though, townhouses, considering scale is important, a 3-story townhouse looks very tall to my eyes still, especially if it's going next to a single family house. And you can kind of get that sense of the size of it there. Now, when we go to the next one of the things specifically in our housing production strategies, it talks about cottage housing, and so cottage housing can take a whole bunch of different forms. So it can be attached, they can be all small, they could have more sides to them. All of that sort of stuff is something that we probably should look at as part of that, as well as really trying to consider how would those work, and in what locations, given the map. I think putting cottage housing on some of our infill lots is very challenging, would be very, very challenging, is what I would argue, so how would that work? And then live work is on the last page. Some interesting designs there. So I wanted to sort of just walk you through those real quick. And then I guess sort of just open it up to a general conversation, and I do have some questions for you folks. I guess, are there any thoughts that you have in going through those maps or going through those materials? Any sort of initial thoughts that you might have before we go into our revelations that you might have? Yeah.
I was just wondering, we spent a lot of time last year looking at the Central Plaza area, and it's one of your walkable zones. How do you see housing going in there? I think some of your even 3-story things could go in there and wouldn't overshadow things if you develop the area that way.
I tend to agree with that. I would tend to agree with that. I think what this project is really different than that is we were really talking about like how we could create something almost new there. Whereas this is really how does additional development play well with other types of other nearby housing, right?
So on that in that case, you're right, three-story housing looks too big next to this town's main kind of housing in the older and established parts of town.
Yeah,
I would, I like the way we did like the chain link fence kind of approach, where it's like the average of the neighborhood, like the block as as like the maximum, so I feel like that kind of thinking makes it sort of even new stuff gets averaged out in a block, so it's not big.
That's the formula.
Yeah, it's just that's what I mean, yeah, and I guess that seems kind of like very bad, but also they're probably better than, they're just like a flat max or just like a setbacks.
yeah,
I don't know what that looks, I don't necessarily want to adjudicate like math equations or
yeah,
this stuff, but it just seems like, to your point, like sometimes you have 30, maybe 35 feet, and most of the neighborhood seems pretty like.
Yeah.
Big.
yeah.
I do think about, like, I don't know how tall this building is across.
How tall is that?
Yep.
Well,
Shades.
I couldn't tell you right offhand.
It doesn't look. It doesn't look crazy high to me.
Yeah,
Is that 35 feet?
I would bet you the back is probably 35 feet.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's probably 30. It seems to me like that's probably the max scale, but that doesn't feel out of place across the street from this building.
Right.
Or heading into downtown, like it's kind of like that sort of that average. I don't know how you
The
imagine.
plug bed in the
But
neighborhood.
if you put that in like your, next to your house or like, well, I think my house would be okay.
But it does kind of dwarf the house that's just to the north.
It does, and I'm sure, yeah, we've heard, I think, about that, but.
so, and I mean, all of this is stuff that, you know, how the transition of scale, that
Yeah.
is very, I mean, it's hard, right? It's a hard thing.
Easy to see, hard to legislate or regulate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly right. But I mean, that's one thing, specifically getting to the whole form component.
Yeah.
Like really thinking about context and designing standards for context, I think. Is something that I would,
But also trying to keep it simple and streamlined and everything, you know, it's
Right.
like Boston times.
right,
I'm sorry, Chair. You can talk.
Kevin?
I think it might be, thank you, Chair, I think it might be interesting to think about. Depending on what the lot looks like, you're trying to infill, have recommended. Size and scale. To those lots and have examples, so if it's a corner lot, it should look one way. If it's an infill in the middle of a street, it should look a different way kind of deal, and maybe they're not. Standards per se, as in you must comply with this,
Yeah.
but they're examples. Best case, yeah, like fast track examples of if you go with this, we fast track it kind of deal. Because we've already vetted this.
Yeah.
It's this heavy incentive, like we were talking about earlier, to. To incentivize these, because I really like some of these styles, and I think. Depending on the location, I think they would transition very nicely in a community and not have the worst impacts of infill. When people think of infill, they think of a giant apartment complex right next to their house, destroying. From their mind, what the characteristics of the neighborhood are, right? And I don't see that with a lot of these developments, so. If there are. If you have like best practices or fast track incentives to these, it might really dictate. Heavily incentivize people to just do what we hope they would do anyway.
right,
And I think if we have community involvement in what those. Characteristics look like, it makes it easier for us to say, these are the ones that make sense, and like I said, like. You know, we just got some infill in our neighborhood, and I actually was. To be honest with you, a little worried when they started building it, but it looks, I mean, it fits really nicely in the neighborhood, and I don't think. I don't think it's a hard transition, right, you know, so.
But it is just 2 stories.
It is just 2 stories, so to that point, right, like there are some of these that are clearly just 2 stories. they would fit nicely, and if it's a corner lot, you can get kind of creative in what that looks like, right, but. Yeah, that might be a really nice solution that takes some of the. Goals of what we're looking for in like a formula that is easier to explain to people, because in the formula, the concern I have is. Explaining to the general population what that looks like.
Yeah,
And with this, we have like incentivized. You know, depending on what the infill is, it can look like this, it can look like that, or it can look like that, if they want a fast track process, which I assume many of the developers would.
Alex?
Yeah, I think actually in that vein, I do think about. Lowering maybe that height, but then offering sort of a halfway to get a sort of an easy variance. Like, based sort of on the average, like if there's something already existing that's over, whatever, I don't know, just whatever that, like, just sort of. Just making that a little bit palatable, I guess, for. Feels weird to be more restrictive, but I do.
it is so I mean, I get,
Yeah,
so. I almost think we can do a combination of
Yeah.
both, where it's like, we're getting more permissible, but in the. Allowance, of being more permissible, we're also like controlling like
other parts.
the other parts of it, so essentially more of the box that the development happens in, so if it's height, if it's.
Yeah.
If we're defining more of the lot coverage, how the lot coverage works or something like that. Potentially we could get to something like that. There is a whole bunch of really interesting, more form-based code sort of approaches out there that define. This is where you're putting the building, this is how the volume of the building is working, this is the height. And then it really allows more of the internal mechanism of the building to. Be played with, you know, so if you're. For example. You've got a 2,000 square foot home. Right, a 2,000 square foot home looks just like a 2,000 square foot fourplex. Right? The difference is. The fourplex has 4 units inside of it. Probably it has more parking, obviously, but. Physically, they look exactly the same, right? Similarly, a 2,000 square foot single family home looks just like a 2,000 square foot duplex, right? If it's divided into 2,000 to 1,000 square foot. And that's sort of, if we took more of that sort of approach where it's like 2,000 is 2,000 is 2,000, the difference is the parking potentially and the facility impacts. Potentially, that's a way to sort of get it.
So,
To Evan's point, we need to define what we mean by it. You know, in such a way that we can explain it to the public.
Yeah.
People are not unnerved by. Just automatically thinking, oh, infill, we're gonna allow people to build a giant apartment complex.
Right,
We need to be able to define that and explain that in a simple manner.
right,
Yeah, I just wanna agree to your point, Fred and Evan, it's like, you know, maximizing the space, right, the efficiency of the design, I mean, cause we know. You know, a home designed 100 years ago, a lot of the interior is just not used, you know, efficiently as it would be today. So like you said, you know, a 2,000 square foot compared to a fourplex, it's gonna be designed interiorly, the aesthetics, but the efficiency is just a lot more economical today.
any other questions?
so. I guess I got some questions in the process of going, in the process of going through the maps, was there anything or any of the materials, was there anything that you found surprising? Specifically,
I just have one question. On, there's this little piece It isn't within the urban boundary, there's just this long rectangle off of Seventh Street to the east of Seventh Street.
Yes,
What is that?
it's a weird little thing, we actually sent out a letter to those folks, I sent out a letter to them, I don't know, 2 days ago or something like that, saying, hey, we're gonna annex some rights away, if you would like to be annexed, we're willing to do it for you, but we're not gonna push it. Essentially what that was back when probably Henry Hill's edition got platted, a portion of Sixth Street. What would that have been? It wouldn't have been that. I don't know exactly what it is. There's a portion of area that never got annexed. It's interesting because.
Right here.
Yeah, it's right, where am I at? It's right south of Henry Hill, it's this guy, right? It's a little. It never got annexed. The interesting thing is we created lots across it at a certain point. But it's never been annexed, and so it's just a little island of unincorporated county.
So do they get taxed at a different rate for that bit of land?
They actually do. I called the county and asked them what's the difference. Their taxing rate is a little bit less.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
So everybody's gonna say no.
Yeah, exactly, but technically, they're not supposed to get City of Independence building permits across it, and technically, they're not supposed to get City of Independence services across it. So,
So this, it's actually the street that's,
it used,
or is it?
yeah, I think it's a part of it. No, I don't know exactly what it is, to be honest. I don't,
Looks like it's.
I can't quite conceptualize how it happened, now that you're bringing it up. I was thinking it was part of Henry Hill, but then I'm like, no, because Henry Hill would have been,
Yeah, it's further south.
yeah, it's,
That's hilarious.
so,
Probably fought it at one. Like at the time, the city was like, we're not gonna deal with it.
yeah. It's, and I mean, if they're like, if they say. At this point, you know, we don't wanna be in the city, then I think we'll probably do it, well, okay. We might annex a portion of, cause there's a portion of Sixth Street. That is still out of the, or no, it's platted Sixth Street. Not actual Sixth Street, there's a portion of platted Sixth Street that is in the county. We'd probably go ahead and annex that, but then leave everything else. The way it is.
Chair,
Yes.
I would just ask, I think the thing that stood out to me is probably number of alley lots. That exists, and either were, I mean, it's sort of, you know, I have,
Yeah.
we have, but I didn't probably realize how hard they ran for all the alleys, that kind of surprised me. They tend to be pretty good lot sizes too, and all that, so sort of, that seems like a learning curve in some ways to figure out how to use that as a, to use alley access to that, or, you know, it's easier to parking and whatever else, so.
So who maintains those alleys, who approves those alleys?
I have thoughts.
There's some of them are, you need a four-wheel drive vehicle.
Yeah, there's no doubt, there's, and this is, I mean, this is part of the thing, the city maintains the alleys conceptually.
Yeah, they're conceptual.
Conceptually, if infill was to go in on an alley, our standard right now is that there would be paving to a far end of the lot. That's, I don't think we would require a sidewalk. So that's one thing to talk about. It's interesting to me, I sort of said earlier, I don't know how cottage housing works in areas like this. It's a hard thing to figure out how to get cottage housing on a lot like that.
Yeah.
But if I took the idea of cottage housing and said, boy, if you took one of these alleys and just did a whole bunch of ADUs in the backyard and had a little alley down the center of it, I'm gonna really go off here. Paved with Western Interlock paper bricks, right? You know? all of a sudden, that creates a little cottage cluster. Right, but it would be done individually and piecemeal, right? I think stuff like that is stuff that we're gonna need to think about. With this project is how do the alleys get improved? Like, to what degree do we want them improved? What do we do with some of these streets up here, in the north part of town? That have no sidewalks, that have no stormwater. Do we need sidewalks in a place like that? Or are the trip volumes so low enough that even with infill, the street essentially functions well enough? All of these things are part of these things where every time an infill, and we get infill projects all the time, people come, can I do a duplex on that lot? Can I do whatever? Every time we ask the question, what are the improvements? What are we gonna make them do? Are we gonna make them for a curve? Are we gonna make them improve a street that's essentially paved, maybe 20 feet wide? Are we gonna make them put in the full half street improvement for a 66-foot road? That's weird, you know, it's challenging, so what do we do and stuff like that? And so that's part of what we want from the project, but I think. With that, we can also ask the questions about scale and what we're anticipating for various areas. Now, one of the things that I hadn't said. Is, I mean, I've walked you, a few of you went on that walk when we went around Fifth Street. Down here by Henry Hill. The fact of the matter is, we have a whole bunch of these middle housing types integrated in our city right now. We've got a fourplex on 11th Street. We've got 8 units off of 8th Street. We've got little tiny multifamily just north of the bridge on Ash Street. We've got those little courtyard apartments at the end of 3rd Street. You know, we have these housing types all over the place, and part of what this project is doing is, I don't know, like, bringing them out of the cold. Bringing them, I don't know, is that right? Essentially, like, bringing them in from the cold. We're essentially like embracing them as a housing type that we have elsewhere. Now,
I think it would be interesting for you to share sometime about what kinds of requests you are getting. See some examples.
oh yeah, so
What are the needs? What are the biggest needs you have?
And what are,
And how are you handling them?
and like, what are the things that are going to be there? So you not like sort of,
Yeah.
like, move too much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like-
Are people asking for stuff that's way outlandish or?
no,
Or is it just like sidewalks and curbing?
Yeah,
It's project
exactly.
not viable.
yeah, no, I think that's a
Maybe
great
help
point.
us identify where we need to.
Yeah, so I'll try and,
Need standards for what-
cause I could probably pull in like 5 or 6 of them right now and tell you how we're dealing with them, but I'll try and bring them to the next
be
meeting,
really useful.
yeah.
Becky?
So Monmouth is putting in a lot of sidewalks. How are they doing that? Because they're putting in past established homes and businesses. Is the city paying for the whole thing or? what's-
I'm fairly certain that's a safe routes to school project that they're doing the current project, the current sidewalks,
Okay,
under.
as they go along Main Street and down Heffley and some of the other side streets. Not just on 99.
Yeah, one thing, is there anything else that was surprising to anybody else?
I think the block size and lot size discussion is interesting, but it's sort of counter to what. Like outlets,
Yeah,
like, oh, the newer places have bigger blocks, they don't,
And
the blocks I need were bigger.
Yeah.
And the new parts, because it's hurt, so what's wrong with them, yeah.
I knew,
Yeah, I don't live, like, I don't live outside, so I don't think, I
yeah,
don't.
but you live on an older lot.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you have a bigger lot. I grew up on the bigger lot.
Yeah.
The older houses had big lots.
Yeah, well, we live on a lot, an older lot that was split, so we live on
Smaller
a,
parcels.
kind of, actually, it's probably a bigger site now, but yeah, I mean, it was divided, I'm pretty sure that's the genesis. But the blocks, I mean, I guess the lot sounds like, yeah, the lot size are small, but the blocks are small too.
But people used to have gardens and they
Sure.
used to have chicken houses and they had bigger meetings.
Yeah, we need more chickens right now, more
Yeah.
chickens. We've been talking about eggs today, that's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
So I mean, what Alex was saying was exactly. Cause I mean, I think, you know, what I was doing was just preparing the information. And at a certain point in the preparing of the information, I was like, oh my goodness, some of the older parts of town are literally. The most well suited for infill development, because they've got the alleys, they've got the lot size, they've got corner lots, and they're in more walkable portions of the community.
Yeah.
Which, all of that was just, it was almost like head slapping so obvious once I realized it, but it was like, it took going through the exercise to be like, oh. I get it, and so I think that that's interesting, I think that. It's also an interesting thing to consider, especially given the fact that that's specifically our historic preservation
So
district.
that's what I was just gonna ask about
Yeah.
historic preservation of the intersection of this.
Yeah, so we're definitely gonna work with Historic Preservation Commission with this project as well, and I'm gonna show them the exact same sort of material. So they can see the same sort of situation.
Sure.
But
I think that's an interesting point about the older neighborhoods, because I saw that in Salem a lot. Is these neighborhoods where you're getting a lot of infill and revitalization are in these older communities that are more walkable, and you have the younger. The younger generations who are raising families now who want that walkable community. So I think we should be really intentional about thinking about that and rethinking. What is that community, what should a community look like? Especially when we're having these edicts from the state telling us to build more. That's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a pretty good size conflict in terms of like a friction point, whether. If we're trying to talk about infill, but in older parts. Like how do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean. I think everybody involved is going.
But I do think that. It's an opportunity because of some of the styles that you just showed us.
Yeah,
They do look old, they do look historic. And so there's potential for really cool partnerships to find ways to incentivize builders to build infill. With the historic vibe that I think the folks who are more apt to buy will really like. That complement this our historic areas.
Maybe you could give the Sears and Roebuck plans.
yeah, but there's all, even to that point, there's probably something around like fast track a certain design element, or like picking some stuff that if you were gonna do it. That will just not hang you up on.
It's like pre-approved.
Basically, yeah, pre-approved materials, form design, something like that.
Yeah. Well, and
Maybe I have a serious.
if based on, if you're paying attention, because it seems like Portland is about 5 to 10 years ahead of us on some of these issues. And if you were paying attention 10-ish years ago to what was going on in Portland with this conversation, like neighborhood associations rose up, the historic preservation folks rose up and were like, you're not gonna build infill in our communities, and then the governor, the legislature and the city council are like, oh, we're just gonna ban the neighborhood associations because that'll fix the problem, right? So I mean, like, I think learning from their mistakes about how to communicate this with neighbors in our community, and we have the benefit and the curse of not having like, you know, neighborhood associations in the same way. But like learning from their mistakes, I think we would see that coming in with ensuring that these projects have the characteristics that like they want the community to look like, but still do what we need to do, seems like the best path.
Right, and I mean. I think that it's. I think that is a good point, because, I mean. Again, I've said it before, we have so much flexibility with zoning. Like, we can literally craft the zoning to achieve what we wanted to achieve, right? Of course, there's 10 adjustments that people can request with it, but we can still craft the zoning. To essentially articulate what it is that we want. Most people will try and build what it is that we want. So that might be just a certain type of uses, right? It might be single family homes on the back of lots, and not specifically duplexes, or we might, I mean, it could be literally anything. So we have a lot of flexibility with that. Now, some of the things that I had in the packet, I had given you the housing production strategy. There was all sorts of activities from the housing production strategy that were included, so things like cottage housing, a broader range of housing types, small lot detached, and improved standards and streamlined review processes. Do you folks agree generally with the idea that we should try and take a look at each of those items as we're going through this infill housing project, that potentially we can sort of check off each of these things as part of this project?
Thank you.
The cottage house thing always comes up, but I'm thinking you need a fairly large lot in order to be able to do that. If you're gonna have parking, and you're gonna have a courtyard, and you're gonna have all of these things. So I think we should look at that, especially because if someone says they're gonna put it in, what are the parameters we're gonna ask them to do? The other question I had was, a couple of times in here, you say it may lower costs to do some of this, but if we're still charging the SDCs per unit, and the cost of building a house is the same, whether it's on a small lot or a big lot. So I don't really understand why it might make the cost lower.
Was that specifically from the housing production strategy? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, so, the SDC conversation is a different conversation.
Right.
Um,
and I understand that, but I'm just saying, if you're looking at the costs, whether it's a bigger lot or a smaller lot, they're still the same costs.
It's true, yeah, it's for the housing production strategy, one of the things that. Some of the housing producers that we talked with was. The land is not so much of an issue in Independence. As it is in other places, the cost of the land. So yeah, no, we definitely understand that. We definitely understand that, because you're exactly right. A 1,200 square foot house is gonna cost the same, whether it's on a 5,000 square foot lot or a 2,500 square foot lot.
I think the cottage cluster conversation should not be the low list priority, but I feel like it takes a lot of oxygen out of the room, and then also like there's not a lot of practicality to it, so I can probably let, I don't know, but we also.
Well, if you look at what Salem's done with the Cottages United, with United Way, it looks like a little neighborhood. It's not a cottage cluster like you would normally think, and there's no roads, it's just sidewalks, like you mentioned before.
I guess I'm just wondering how. It's in my mind, this person's me talking, it feels like there's not that many lots here that it applies, but it has probably, we're gonna spend a lot of time talking about the rules and everything else, and I don't feel like it's not moving the needle the way that other things can.
That is, I think it's an interesting take, and I think it's probably a good take, honestly, like. Because when I think of. So I've told you guys this, my first job was up on Whidbey Island, it was in Langley where this whole sort of modern cottage cluster movement got started, right? With things like Third Street cottages and all of that sort of stuff. When I look at those and when I look at the lots here, I think there's about one place that could potentially handle them well, and I think that's along Seventh Street, on the west side of Seventh Street, where the lots are kind of deep along that west side of Seventh Street. Potentially, it could work in a place like that, but beyond that, there's very few places that, other than greenfield development. And I think that in our mixed density residential zone, we probably would allow cottage cluster housing anyway.
Yeah, it just feels like something that we could. Allow, like, if the project came in, I feel like we could talk about it from a conditional use perspective or something like that, and not have to spend a bunch of time creating policies around it that are never gonna get used. I guess that's my point, it just doesn't seem like an efficient.
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and I think that your point of it taking a lot of oxygen
Yeah,
is absolutely true, because. That's a really interesting take, I appreciate that.
Could it be,
Salem is geared towards seniors, so it's a one-off.
yeah, and I'm fine with the one-offs, I just don't wanna go spend a bunch of time and maybe, I'll say political capital would be the wrong phrase for it, but just developing the policy and having to notice it and go through this process of maybe. Next time we get one, and we could probably just do it on a conditional use anyway, and just, you know.
yeah, I mean, my point was, it seems like for cottage cluster, we would wanna have a pilot. You know, one time.
Yep.
And us being intentional about where it is.
Yeah.
Not just as like a use, it's
Yeah.
like, we're gonna demonstrate, like what you said, we're gonna demonstrate this,
Yeah.
and we're gonna. Show the public that some of the theories of this are not valid. And then maybe 20 years down the road, we build them, you know, in a way that's more than just a one-off kind of deal.
Yep.
I think that's good. So if we allowed more housing in neighborhoods, are there any particular types that you saw that you thought in the packet that you thought looked particularly good? Was it specifically that they looked historic? Was it the design? What was it about some of these that you thought made some of them palatable versus?
I don't, in fact, that some of them look like they're subdivided Victorians.
Yeah, I think I think I remember even discussion of the place across the street, talking about how you need those photo capacity plans look like two places rather than one big, a little bit of that kind of stuff works.
Yeah,
But realistically, like. I don't have. I'm the least one person there, you know, I think I don't care about this. But I think, yeah, like, it's like, you know, this space. But
Lots of those have been from the 1970s, that really is.
yeah, that's right. There's one of them, there's one of them, our intern prepared this for me. And I saw that picture and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like that one.
Flat roof,
Not that.
I like the side by side duplexes.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
right.
I think the scale of the lots better.
Yeah, the stack one
The stack.
scale, the stack one scale, and I think, you know, I've seen, Minneapolis has the fourplexes everywhere.
Yeah. Talks a lot about the fourplex, I have yet, I don't know, I'm curious what the stats are, I think who's put one in the last.
Yeah, I know that there's
Like, if someone better new. Okay, yeah,
there's a couple of new ones in Olympia too.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I think, yeah. I don't know, like. I really care about.
But to your all's point, like, the ones that people are used to are probably the best ones for us to
Yeah.
incentivize. Because They're no, people have seen them,
Yeah.
people understand.
A fourplex has less park, I mean, you know, the parking thing is always.
I was gonna
It's up in the
mention that.
neighborhood,
I
yeah.
don't think Becky was.
No, it's fine, I mean, I would acknowledge it, where it's like, if you put 8 units on a small lot versus 4 units, like, okay. There's not to be consideration, so it seems more feasible. Just, yeah, and less friction in putting in the neighborhood, so, That's so.
Cool. Okay, and then, I mean, I think. We've sort of talked about the last one, but what do you think are some key things that we're gonna need to be considering? Parking, scale, is there anything else that we're gonna need to? Historic preservation,
We'll run into that for sure.
And
historic preservation, absolutely, that's good,
will the same sorts of restrictions apply that say for single family dwelling, the setback, the kind of architecture that you're using, because they're all on the southwest, in the town, they're all very similar. We don't have the cut-off roofs like the 50s and 60s houses. We have, you know, more of a eave overhang, we have
Front porch.
outlines and,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, and we have those standards, as design standards for single family homes, I mean, I'm sure we would apply them.
Yeah.
Equally to a house like this.
So a couple, 3 years ago, there was a lot of upset about an apartment or a house that's going in just on the edge of the historic district, and it's gonna have, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but it was gonna look pretty modern.
One across from the movie theater.
I think so,
That was
someplace
great.
in there. So
Street that one.
the design things didn't hold for that one, so I'm kind of curious, where's the cutoff? How do you decide which one you apply them to and which ones you don't have a say in?
So, okay, so that is where you get back into the block scale and the house scale sort of conversation is. Where do we expect house scale sorts of buildings, where do we expect block scale sorts of buildings? And when we created the historic preservation overlay, the historic residential overlay. That was an attempt to say. Commercial buildings in these areas are supposed to look more like residences than they are to look like commercial buildings. And so that's how you got like that development across the street where it looks more like. Where it does a better job of breaking up the scale of the building rather than. Pushing it to the street, going up 40 feet, like a more commercial style building. The other side of that block was not in that historic residential overlay, it was in what I would say the block scale, and so the design was far more of the entire lot and all that sort of stuff. And so that's why it got a lot of pushback, specifically was it felt to some folks like it was out of the scale of the surrounding neighborhood. Funny thing is, I mean, that grain tower and I think in that picture over there is taller than that. Which is a block from that proposed building, it would be taller than. That proposal, I mean, that was what the architect said at the historic preservation meeting, she says, I'm a block from downtown. I'm a block from this, the water tower and then the big steel building over here. What I'm trying to do is sort of the two. And so, it did get approved through the Historic Preservation Commission, she was meeting a lot of the historic, the downtown design standards. So there's that, okay, I think all of that is very good, I think that that's just sort of a sample of what we're gonna be talking about. I do think it's a chance for us to really try and address a whole bunch of things, and there will be a whole lot more conversations with folks in the community about what would you like to see? What is too big? What is too much? What are your concerns? What should we be focusing on? All of those sorts of things, as part of this project, and I do take the point, yes, we should absolutely. Consider how we're talking with folks about it, it's not just infill, it's.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the thing is infill's gonna happen. Period, what this really is a change. Yeah, this is our chance to really get ahead of it and say, this is how we would like this to contribute to the community.
Right. Right? Another video for tonight.
We do, it's courtesy of Counselor Core, and I will say, I will encourage any of you folks, if you ever see a good video in the range of 5 to 10 minutes. To show at a historic, at a planning commission meeting or a historic preservation commission meeting. I would love to get your thoughts and actually show it.
Ready?
Kind of revert into this solitude. It's humiliating. I find especially the women, we don't say anything to anyone about it. My name is Judith, and I've been living in my car at 72 years old since the end of February. Good morning. I'd like a medium-sized black. Okay. I'm not always this sweet sounding either. It's a facade. It's the first thing I do when I get up and start my day. I go and get a cup of coffee. And then I head across the street to this cemetery and organize my car for the day. Now, St. Mary's Cemetery is a local place where a lot of homeless people come to. I've seen a woman my age who is currently living in the trees over here. I'm a working visual artist. I have been my whole life. Once a woman is single and aging, she has no safety net, none. For the last 5-6 years of my work life, even with my Social Security, I was not able to pay a rent with that combined income.
What were you doing?
I was working as a cashier at the Market Basket. It's not safe living like this when you're older. You have to drive everywhere you need to go. If I'm gonna have something to eat, I have to go someplace to get food. If I need to use a bathroom, I have to get in the car and drive someplace. We're at my storage container, and this is where I had the movers bring all of my belongings. A lifetime of work and collecting, and this is it. I kept my drafting table, and I tried to keep it open because I was hoping that maybe I could work a little bit from here, but it's ridiculous, impossible. This is the cabinet where I keep a lot of my stored goods when I'm home. This is my son with his first tuna, and this is my children when they were little, and this is something my daughter made in school, and here's our family portrait. Bye, Steph. here I am on the Rowley site at apartments.com, and there's one rental available, and it's for $3,500. My budget pushing it is $2,000. No one is moving anywhere because there's no place to move to. Just like crying all the time. It's ridiculous. Just ridiculous. I don't know. I guess I expect more of myself. This is another adventure. I'm just too old for it anymore. I really understand that when you're in the middle of something, it feels like it's never gonna end. But, you know, I can't find a place. I can't find a place. I've exhausted my resources. I looked in southern Maine, I looked in southern New Hampshire, I looked in northern New Hampshire. I really looked at everything. I need help. Welcome things, welcome my cooking supplies to our new home. It's not quite real yet. I just expect it to go away at any second. Is that you, my pie? Yes, it is. It's so nice to have you living with me again. Every morning I've had my coffee and sat here looking at where I am and everything. I just cry. I just cry and be grateful. I'm very grateful.
I don't know, CDC recently, is that?
Well, hey, so I mean, again, this is why we talk about housing, is fundamentally people need places to live. I mean, and one of the things that we've heard in our housing needs analysis and our housing production strategy is any type of housing. Any type of housing, anywhere is gonna help, right? And so that's why things like the Polk CBC rezone are important. That's why things like greenfield development are important. And that's why things like this infill development are important. Because ideally, we have multiple people contributing to housing. What I like about infill and the possibilities of infill in particular is it enables folks with property to do something unique with their land. Otherwise, if we don't enable that, and we don't figure out how we're gonna do that, we're constrained by only big projects and market things aligning to create housing. And so creating more paths to provide housing is definitely something that would be beneficial to me.
I think when we get into the real meat and potatoes of the discussion, I would almost. It's weird, we need it for, but like, have a second meeting in a month. To like go through some of this stuff, so that we don't have. I mean, it's not bad, but it's just in terms of more opportunities for people to either weigh in, or just be able to have a little bit. More in-depth discussion rather than just like having to cover the business of the meeting and then also the kind of the discussion and those types of things, so.
Like especially.
Yeah, just like, yeah, like on the, you know, kind of in between sort of thing, because I feel like this is a really. Big thing, and also to make sure that we are properly communicating. With everybody else, citizens, and being able to have everybody kind of weigh in. Yeah, it seems like not a bad idea to. This seems like bigger than other things that we talked.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah,
We're gonna push people more, But a lot of things were done.
Well, yeah, that's right. I guess that's it. And we're not trying to, I don't think we're trying to come over the top. We're trying to create pathways for more units to be on the market in more places.
Right, it's exactly right, and I think that you guys are right, it is fundamentally different than a lot of stuff that we've done, because a lot of stuff that we've done. Is out either in the southwest portion or in the central Talmadge area where there's not a whole lot of stuff around, but I think what we can see from. At least some of this data is some of the best places for some of this stuff is. In areas that people most prize in the community, so how do we figure that out?
Most in the most emotion.
Right.
Yeah, right. Unfortunately.
We have to think a lot about affordability too, though, you know, that's such an amorphous term. And I've been telling people, when you talk about a fixed income, talk about social security.
Yeah.
You know, we're all on a fixed income. It's just, you know, it depends on how well you plan for the future, kind of thing, you know. But we have to start thinking about social security only, you know, those kind of people, I mean, that it's obviously their situation. And people want to be able to age in place.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to provide resources for people to age in place. You know, if they wanna move out of their 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and move into something smaller, that's great, it creates opportunities for families then. But if we don't have alternatives for them,
Yeah, it's not this to go.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Right,
All those to adjourn.
okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
I,
Opposed? It is adjourned.
Thanks for bringing me. And the Blackside cartoon, because like, can I be? It's not like grass. Oh, no, 6:30 tomorrow. Come on, baby, let's do this.
Well, that's why I switched to 3D was never designed. But the problem is.
But
Don't work, it never-